Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Let's start by familiarizing yourselves with the webinar tool. Take a look around for the chat button, and you can tell us where you're located in the chat so we know who we've got with us today. But I would ask you for questions, please use the Q&A tool, not the chat. So you can say hi in the chat, but really for questions, we prefer you to put the questions in the Q&A button. That'll make it much easier for us to answer them. And before we get started with introductions, I'm just going to share a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, there are no less than eight awesome upcoming events from IIoT World. So what we're in today is the manufacturing and supply chain days that goes through tomorrow. Then we have all things IIoT on January 26th, World Energy Day on March 2nd, Manufacturing Day, May 17th, Industrial Metaverse Day, intriguing, on June 28th, ICS Cybersecurity Day, which I know we'll be paying a lot of attention to on September 27th, Smart Buildings Day on October 25th, Manufacturing and Supply Chain Day on December 7th. So I hope you got all that. I'm sure you will see forthcoming invitations to these events. We're going to be taking questions at the conclusion, so please post them as we go in the Q&A tool. The track will run for just under 60 minutes. We'll have you out of here on time. And it wouldn't be possible to run this virtual conference without all the sponsors. So thank you to Hitachi Vantara, HiveMQ, Faircom. On behalf of Fortinet, I say you're welcome. Eurotech, Oxys, Building Cybersecurity, Zona, MSA, GE Digital. It's nice to see you here, GE Digital, my former friends and employer. IFM, Intel, Litmus, and NCC Group. So with housekeeping out of the way, let's introduce the topic and the speaker. So what we're going to be talking about right now is securing the convergence in manufacturing, Internet of Things. And we're leaning into the cybersecurity essentials focused on people, process, and technology behind the growing manufacturing, or IIoT, and what is now being introduced as Industry 5.0. That's a new one for me. So let's look at who we have here with us today. We have several panelists. First, we have Dwayne Edwards from Tenable. Dwayne is a security engineer in sales at Tenable. He works at the intersection of business and technology between operational and information security. Dwayne previously was employed at Rockwell Automation and spent over 20 years at Cisco in a variety of technical leadership positions. Stephen Mustard with ISA is an industrial automation consultant with extensive technical and management experience across multiple sectors. Backed by 30 years of engineering experience, Steve specializes in the development and management of real-time embedded equipment and automation systems and cybersecurity risk management related to those. He serves as president of National Automation Incorporated. Mustard is a board member of the Mission Critical Global Alliance, or MCGA, and a member of the Water Environment Federation, WEF, Safety and Security Committee. He was the 2021 president of the International Society of Automation. Wow. And Chris Blavelt, my friend from Fortinet, leads the OT Consulting Systems Engineering team at Fortinet. Chris has over 10 years of cybersecurity and critical infrastructure experience working in the renewable energy sector. He was directly involved in the development, construction, and operations of wind and solar power plants and their high voltage systems. I'm Bill Noto. I do product marketing for OT over here at Fortinet, and I've been with Fortinet for about 2 years. Before being in Fortinet, I was at GE, so with GE Digital and GE Wind, doing industrial Internet of Things, platform products, also OT security. And in the Wind business, I did SCADA and controls, both product management and securing and all sorts of stuff like that. So anyway, let's jump in. So thank you, panelists, for joining me today. It's a pleasure to see you all. You all look well, and I'm sure we're going to have an interesting discussion. So the first question to kick it off, we're going to focus on people. So people inside manufacturing organizations are really the first line of defense. How should organizations arm them to be a watchdog against cyber attacks? And Steve, would you like to kick us off on that question?
Sure. Thank you, Bill. Yeah, this is a topic close to my heart. I believe that the people side is a really important part of the cybersecurity management system that any organization has. And I think that it starts with awareness training. The organizations need to make sure that their people are aware that no matter what they do in the organization, they have a part to play in the management of cybersecurity. So they can be responsible for causing an incident, directly or indirectly, but most importantly, they can also be, as you said, the first line of defense, because They can see unusual behaviors, they can see unusual activity, they know what normal is, and they can take action much more quickly than anyone else can. So we need to encourage the organizations to help their people be able to respond, and also to know how to report these things, and also how to take action, and to also encourage them, like in safety, if they see some unsecure behavior, to report that, stop that as well, to make sure that it doesn't create a problem.
That makes total sense to me. I mean, it sounds like it's everyone's responsibility and everyone has a role to play. Panelists, any comments or thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a good advice, Steve. I would also say, look, people think in simple terms. If you can give them simple things to do, that helps. So you might, and look, it's a common theme with me is, use what you can from sort of the IT world. So, hey, what does phishing look like? This is what you should avoid doing. Depending on the organization you work for, usernames and passwords are important. We sometimes don't act like that on our side of the wall. Single use of compute inside of OT, so we're not browsing horrible sites and things like that. I mean, just in whatever fits best with your organization, but it's just like 2 or 3 simple things to get them focused, then help them expand beyond that.
Great.
Yeah, that's a great point, is that what we see in the IT world, if you have admin access, then it's a best practice to only access that admin access from a dedicated computer, right? If you are programming or changing the configuration of automation or safety equipment, that is something that should be done as well. You don't want those computers becoming compromised. Worst case, you lose all your intellectual property. Or actually, that's the best case. Worst case is you compromise the equipment and somebody gets hurt. Right?
Well, let's go on to the next question. I think we're in consensus on this one. So here we go. Cybersecurity essential as we secure convergence is the ability to keep up with cybercrime. Criminals are moving faster than ever. How is this impacting the people that support the cybersecurity strategy for manufacturers? So Chris, let's go to you on that one.
Well, I think that it's impossible to keep up with as an individual, and it's very difficult as a group, unless you really know what you're doing. And so what I've heard for a while is that we're not a target. The first thing I would say to that is you don't get to decide whether or not you're a target. The second is that you don't have to be. A lot of cybercrime is about getting lucky, getting through, having somebody click on something, or maybe finding a hole in some kind of electronic security perimeter, and then exploiting those vulnerabilities. And then once they got you, right? And so having not just signature-based, which are difficult to keep up with, having technologies that look at behavior, whether on the network, whether on the endpoint, is really critical to being able to prevent infection, prevent those infections from moving around your network, whether it's your IT or your OT environment. We've also seen that there are a lot of IT systems that are indirect dependencies of operations, right? Colonial Pipeline being the prime example.
That's a great example. Yep. Steve, Dwayne, what do you think? Any?
Yeah, I think that's a great points. I think back to what we were saying earlier about the people. I mean, since there is, as Chris says, there's no way you can manage this and prevent this from happening. You have to be prepared for it. And obviously, like we said, preparing the people is important. I think we know that there's a skills shortage, there's a gap. I've seen myself in many of these manufacturing organizations that the role of managing cybersecurity is given to someone who's already got about 20 other different roles, and they don't necessarily get the time and resources to be able to do it properly. And I think, it's not enough to just say, hey, we've allocated you as the person, so problem solved. You have to basically provide the tools and resources for people to be able to do the job, and the space for them to be able to do the job.
Dwayne,
briefly, how does it impact the people that support, it's it's just yet another source of stress, right?
Right.
It's
Yep.
We talk about the skill shortages and all the things that are all associated with that, but I think we all need to reset a little bit and understand you can't just give controls engineers or other people that work on the shop floor, a 14th hat to wear.
Mhm.
They're super sharp people, but they're not security. They don't have a background in security. We have to staff up, or we have to find other ways to bring that into the fold, as opposed to just giving them another task that, let's face it, they're just not prepared to do. Nor are
Setting
people
them
like
up
me
for failure.
prepared to write code, right? I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea there.
Great. So I'm going to go on to the next question. This is the last question in our people section. So Steve, this one I'll direct towards you. So Fortinet published a 2022 cybersecurity skills gap global research report, and that stated that 76% of organizations indicate that their board of directors now recommend increasing funding to IT and cybersecurity headcount. So if there's a skills shortage, where can organizations look for talent to fill these roles?
Yeah, well, I think picking up on what Dwayne said, I agree with him that the controls engineers, those people in the manufacturing operations side, if they're going to be responsible for the cybersecurity aspect, they need to be trained properly, and you can't just expect people to pick that sort of stuff up. However, I would say that one of the great things about those people is that they understand the environment, the process, the failure modes, and all of the things that they need to understand, so that they really do understand the implications of a cybersecurity incident.
Mhm.
So they do need to have training to complement what they already know, but they're in a great position to be able to properly manage the risk. Yeah, I think that generally we know that there are people doing various education courses in cybersecurity at different levels. I would say that my experience is there aren't many courses out there that focus on the OT, IoT side of cybersecurity. There's a lot of IT cybersecurity. So my concern is we need to make sure that we provide these people who are going to do facility manufacturing based cybersecurity with all the skills, not just, here's the knowledge of IT cybersecurity. You need to know all about the OT side as well. So
Exactly.
it's a real challenge, but I think understanding the challenge, and then we can try and address it with various organizations and training programs.
Yeah, I suppose another way we could ask this question is it better to take an OT engineer and train him with security skills, or to take an IT security person and train them with OT engineering skills? And I'm kind of biased towards training the OT engineers with security, because I feel like there are fewer OT engineers than, even though there's a skill shortage in general in cybersecurity. I think there's, to me, this is, Bill's opinion. It's not based on fact or data, but my intuition is that there are just fewer OT engineers than cybersecurity people in general. So
I have that bias too. I come from the automation background, so my natural inclination as well, but I know not everyone agrees with that. But I do think when we talk about cybersecurity in the manufacturing and IoT space, we're not trying to worry about the failure of technology. We're trying to worry about the consequences of the failure of technology in the manufacturing process. So it's important you understand that.
And it's not to just keep on this theme, but I feel like the impact of making the risk of downtime, et cetera, in OT, and the way OT is special, like those OT engineers already understand all of that, right? So you don't have to train them on that part too. Anyway. All right, let's go on. So before I go on, though, I want to remind listeners, you can submit your questions using the Q&A option in the console. And I don't know if you noticed it, but Carolina put a little note that there's an incentive for your questions. So she wrote, "Thanks for choosing to spend time with us. Today's sessions are live, and we'd like to make them as interactive as possible. To encourage engagement, IIoT World is giving away a 1-year IIoT World VIP community membership, waiving the $999 fee to all folks that ask relevant questions in the Q&A section. So don't just write, what time is it? But write something relevant to the discussion, and you get a free year of IIoT VIP community membership. Very cool. And please remember to put those questions in the Q&A section. All right. And I see some questions coming in. So let's move on next. So now we're going to talk about process. So Dwayne, to you, any process takes planning and coordination. What are some of the cybersecurity essentials for a manufacturing process? How do you execute process changes when so much of what is done in manufacturing has been around for decades? So kind of a lot of questions there, or a few.
Yeah, I mean, so process kind of overloaded word in this environment, right? It could mean a number of things, but if we look at it from security process, I would say, look, we need to, and I agree with kind of what you and Steve were saying. I won't repeat any of the things back to you, but if you understand the process and the places where you can break things, then it's, how do I take the culture and the policies that are already on sort of the IT side of the organization and take those things that actually fit into the shop floor, for example, and then say, okay, here's the good, here's the stuff that doesn't fit. And I'll give you the example, right, is, yeah, look, obviously the words that we use a lot are insecure by design or what have you. Yeah, the stuff's been around a long time. So that doesn't mean we can't change. It means remediation and controls are different, segmentation being an extremely often cited and well worth pursuing. But, even things like patching, which is a very controversial or can be a good controversial, bar fight. We can still patch windows. We can still do things, right? And I think then it becomes, okay, great. We know there's issues. We know there's a past. The biggest problem I see is we still see a lot of people commissioning brand new lines and brand new things without security in mind. And that's kind of the part that has to stop. And we all have to be, I think, cognizant of the fact that the technology part of the system has a very different life cycle than the heavy part of the system, right? And we need to adjust and affect that accordingly.
Right on. How about the panelists? Any response? Any thoughts?
Well, I guess what I would say is that by understanding the process, you understand what the problems are. You understand where your weak points are. And if you are an attacker, right, think about, how would I attack my environment? What do I know I could do that would get me in the door? And then once I get in the door, where would I go, right? Having all the knowledge that you have, assume they have all the knowledge that you have. And then if you can defend against that, then you're in a really good place. And if you're not, then you need what you need to work on.
So GE, we call that failure effects and analysis, right?
Perfect.
Yeah. Great. All right, Steve, over to you. Where do you see the greatest opportunity for, or am I blowing it? No, I'm not. Where do you see the greatest opportunity for process improvement to support a cybersecurity strategy in manufacturing?
I think that what Dwayne and Chris were talking about, building on that, there's a lot of great processes and procedures that are already in place in manufacturing to maintain high availability of production lines and things like that. And a lot of those principles are actually really good principles that actually help manage cybersecurity as well. So the thing is, though, what I tend to see is that cybersecurity still today is somewhat treated as a separate thing. There's all the other things, safety and production management and things like that. And then, by the way, there's safety as well. I'd like to see it more integrated so that safety is just, cybersecurity is just another contributing factor to production outage or to a safety incident or something like that. And then manage those things in the way they're already being managed, because generally speaking, manufacturing organizations are pretty good at keeping high productivity, keeping high production availability, and also keeping people and the environment safe. And so if you can do all of that and just recognize that cybersecurity is another thing, like Chris says, if you understand how it all works and you understand what the failure modes are, then you're in a good position to say, well, actually, we haven't thought about what happens if somebody does this, and we need to protect against that. An example being, with cybersecurity, because it comes from the IT world, we're always worried about protecting data. We're trying to protect the perimeter and to try and stop people from getting in, which is great. And we always think about manufacturing facilities like little islands where they're really well isolated from the rest of the world. But you can equally create chaos if you're inside the facility and you do something wrong as well. So just because you're well protected and you're isolated and maybe you're not connected to the outside world, or you're through a firewall or whatever it might be, doesn't mean that you're not vulnerable to cybersecurity incident. And the best people to understand that are the ones on the production line.
It sounds like these things need to be tested, right? If you have a plan, but you haven't exercised the plan, who knows what's going to happen when the blank hits the fan? Not to be rhyming. I guess I am rhyming, but yeah, you got to test the plan, right? What about Chris and Dwayne? Any other thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a very good point, right? If you have a standard operating procedure and you haven't trained your operators on what that standard operating procedure is, then you don't have a standard operating procedure, right? And so part of that training needs to be practicing execution, whether it's a tabletop exercise, whether it's some kind of virtualized environment that you're able to run through what your playbooks are. How do I respond to this event, right? And give those scenarios to let them learn.
In terms of just being very prescriptive, I would say briefly, if you can figure out a way to fund it, make a lab, right? And look, I don't mean obviously that you can absolutely and completely replicate a production line, but you can certainly replicate the automation part. And I think we all collectively have spent a lot of time taking the fruits of our labors of automation, right, in terms of cutting costs and all those things, without necessarily reinvesting some of that money into further making it more secure, or making it more safe, or more kind of anything. And it's certainly I think a worthwhile exercise to look at the money you've saved doing automation, how you're going to continue to save, and taking a very small portion of that and putting it into a lab and practicing, not just security, but traditional just operations things. We're all afraid to touch the thing because it works, and I don't want to break it.
Exactly. That's what I think makes it so brittle, right?
Yeah.
It's there's, these environments can be rigid. Sometimes the automation OEMs don't want anyone to touch anything. But moreover, I feel like a lot of this stuff is just legacy, and people are scared that they're going to break something. But
was it working? Did you touch it?
Right. So to me, one part of that plan or process should be have a goal that you measure to of how quickly you can restore service, right? Including, and you can get really granular about that. Like if the PLCs are fried, how quickly does it take me to reinstall the firmware, re-put the control code in them, make sure it's right, get the parameters right, make sure it's communicating properly with the DCS or SCADA stuff. Like you can imagine things going wrong, and then how long is it going to take you to get it right so that your hair isn't on fire, and you can practice those things, right? So if you get ransomware in your HMIs or engineering workstations, how long does it take you to just format the thing and reinstall it so that it's working again? Like that seems like should be part of those tabletop things you practice. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Am I making any sense, or is that crazy talk?
No, yeah.
It's right back to, it's a good example of what I was saying earlier about using the thing that IT has said and done for a long time, right?
Yep.
A backup, while different and differently challenged in OT, certainly should be done. In many cases, we're not doing it, right? And we pay so much attention to prevention, we don't pay enough attention to recovery. So no, I think it's a great point, Bill.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to be on our last question on process pretty soon. And I feel like we're going pretty quickly through our agenda here. So we're about halfway through time. I guess we're okay. Chris, to you, what role do guidelines like NISTs or IEC 62443 play in process improvement for cybersecurity in manufacturing specifically?
Well, I mean, they're a great place to start, right? If you don't know where to even begin, I would become familiar with those standards as best you can. I mean, there are 62443 classes on Udemy now, right? The standard's getting out there, it's getting adopted. It is a great framework for best practices. And so learn what those frameworks are, and then understand your environment and how it applies to you, right? Take what works, remove what doesn't work for your environment and for your resources, and then look at how you're going to apply those different technologies, what people you have to monitor them. Because if you have a SIM or something like that, and you don't have anybody looking at it, you just wasted a lot of money, right? And so make sure that when you are investing in technologies, whether passive or active, that you are prepared to support them so that they're actually effective.
I would also add that really amplifying what Chris says is that, even standards like 62443, although it's a standard with lots of normative references that say, you shall do this and you shall do that, it's risk-based. So it's not a prescriptive recipe that says you have to do all those things and you have to do it irrespective of what type of system it is and what the risks are. You actually look at the risk to the organization and you have your own risk tolerance, which is yours, and nobody can argue with you about that. And that's how you base your decision about what controls you have and what level of security you need and all of that sort of stuff. So same goes for the NIST cybersecurity framework. It's not a standard, it's a guide that kind of leads you into all of those other normative references that exist in all kinds of other documents. And again, you can, like Chris says, you pick the things that apply to you and they're going to work for you. And as long as you understand what you're doing and what gaps you have, if you have any gaps, and you're prepared to manage those risks and with those gaps, then that's good for you.
Absolutely. How about you, Dwayne? Did you want to comment?
I don't know that I can add anything to that other than that's not repetitive.
Okay. Well, I see that we have a lot of good questions coming in. By the way, we've got probably more questions than we'll be able to speak to. But by all means, keep them coming, because I think we're going to have some good time for Q&A, because it's now about halfway through the call and we're on the third section, right? So finally on the technology section. So cybersecurity essentials for technology. And Dwayne, this question is going to be directed towards you. What are 2 or 3 challenges for manufacturers when it comes to the technology they use?
Well, I think we mentioned a couple, but I'll reiterate, right? And to me, and although we talk about technology, it's that mindset, right? And I mentioned this already, but I'll say it again. It's, quit with the past, right? We all too often, I go out and I have a big network, or I have a large background in networking, right? Based on where I've worked. And, I see so many technology implementations based on, a well-trod path of things like DeviceNet or, all these other things where we just replace the old technology with the new and don't use any of the advantages. So again, having a little bit of a cultural shift to say, can I bring in additional outside expertise? Very hard thing for engineers to do. I'm one of them, right? But can I take, if I'm a controls engineer, can I take advice from a networking guy or vice versa and look to just spending a little different way or a little more money can make a big difference. And that's not a technology issue, right? That's a cultural issue, and understanding, and quite frankly, again, rewarding OEMs and manufacturers for building security into the devices they provide. So often it's a zero-sum game. It's I need to build and design and implement this in the lowest possible way. We don't do that in our personal life. I don't buy, the cheapest car I can. I buy something that's going to last, and I don't mean to get off in a rant there, right? But you need to reward the people who are building secure devices. Let's put it that way. And I think, again, while we look at preventative capabilities, we need to look at architectures that are resilient and have reliability built in based on redundancy and some other things, which again, I think maybe we could pay more attention to how we build out those networks. We've got millions of dollars of capacity quite often on an upside down pyramid on little pieces of networking gear that are, could be done differently. I'll stop there.
Okay. Hey, Chris, do you want to take a stab at this one too?
Yeah, I mean, it's always the eternal problem, right? Is how do we allocate limited resources for something that is not going to drive additional revenue, right? And so, what I try to do as I'm applying this technology is make sure that it's enabling availability, right? There are a lot of ways that a cyber, but sometimes just a network incident can shut down a process. And sometimes that's human error, right? And so why don't we make sure that we're applying this technology in a way that not only stops attackers, but personnel in the plant who, might be plugging in a laptop and doing something that, they learned later was a terrible idea, right? It's happened to me as a young automation engineer. I'm sure it's happened to everyone, right? You make a mistake, you hear a breaker open or some process shut down, you go, oh no, right?
I turned the wind turbine off by accident once.
There you go. Yeah, don't hit the big red button, right?
I hit the
red button. We have those big red buttons waiting to be accidentally, somebody knocked their backpack into them in the networking world too. And so these technologies can be used to make sure that people interacting with these process control devices aren't making mistakes, as well as attackers trying to get in and cause problems.
So I what you all are saying resonates with me. I want to add one additional point, just in terms of automation technology. PLCs historically did not have security built into them because they were historically designed to not be connected to anything other than the sensors and the SCADA system, right? And the motors, right? Or actuators more broadly. So there's not a lot of authentication. There's not a lot of authorization. There's very little encryption in most PLCs in the field. And now we're connecting a lot of these environments up for digital transformation reasons. So we want to know when things are going to break. We want just-in-time manufacturing. We want integration with ERP or billing systems, et cetera. And so to me, that is a big challenge, is that the PLCs lack a lot of basic security capability, especially the older stuff that's installed for a long time. Newer PLCs have more security built into them, but the installed base is large of PLCs that don't. And so I just want to point that out. That's a challenge, right? So
yeah, I mean, people talk about, we said it before, stop buying new stuff that doesn't meet good cyber practices. And there was a conversation I was having the other day. Do you remember when devices used to have device passwords, right? There was one password for the device. And I said, what do you mean, remember when? I can go out and buy one of those devices right now, right? And so let's make sure that we are applying these standards especially to the new stuff that we're doing. And that's your greatest opportunity to be able to apply these best practices.
I'll add on to that, Chris. Remember when, and that includes today, a lot of these controllers have this thing called a key on the front of them that you can turn, and nobody does. Yeah, that's probably the most effective thing you can do. And
or the keys left in engineering mode instead of run mode. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. All right, moving through it. Automation can sometimes raise a red flag for industrial asset owners seemingly taking action without human intervention. So let me just say that another way. A lot of people in OT are scared of automation. How can automation help with cybersecurity, given the infrastructure is a mix of modern and legacy equipment?
Well, I'd say that we already have automation systems in our environments, right? They're making our products. The safety systems are a special kind of fully automated response, right? That's very specific type of engineering discipline. And so I guess we have to ask ourselves, what is the difference? And the difference in my mind is that we spend a lot of time ensuring that we have accurate data and high confidence in that data so we can make decisions, in this case, automated decisions. The point of a cyber attack is to give you high confidence in bad data, right? I just described Stuxnet. And so what we talk about from an automation perspective is some type of person in the middle, automated response. This event happened, recommended action is XYZ. We know what that recommended action is because we've built our playbooks and we've practiced our tabletop exercises. But now executing that response can take a lot of time if that is not also automated. And so having the recommendation, having the operator make a decision to execute the action according to the playbook is really the best way to do it. It gives the operator the control they need. If I have a high pressure warning and my response is to do X, Y, and Z, I want that response to be automated, right? And there's no reason that we can't apply the same process here, where the operator is making a decision on how to respond to a cyber attack.
Great. All right. So I think we're going to have to advance to our closing thoughts section so that we have time for the Q&A. So Steve, this one's for you. Where do you see the greatest opportunity for a manufacturer when it comes to their people supporting cybersecurity at the front line?
Well, a few of the things that we said today really sum it up, and what Chris was just saying there was really important. If you take that Stuxnet example, how many centrifuges were damaged before someone realized that there must be something weird going on, that centrifuges will keep being damaged all the time? And so that kind of unusual activity, out of the ordinary stuff, people who are in those processes should spot that kind of thing, and they should be encouraged to query it and investigate it. Back to what you were saying about automating things, you don't necessarily guarantee that something that's automated is doing the right thing all the time. So you need to look into it and, do a root cause analysis and find out why this weird thing keeps happening. So the people are the ones who know best how these things work. They know the failure modes, they know what looks good, what looks bad, and we need to use all these processes and procedures that already exist and then just support them, give them the time and space, and give them the resources so they're able to do this job properly.
Fantastic. Panelists, any response or any additional thoughts you'd add? No.
I think that's good.
Okay, Dwayne, this one's to you. How does a manufacturer take the first steps to start or restart a cybersecurity program that's integrated into their processes?
Yeah, I mean, so, Chris mentioned that we talked about a little standards earlier, and Chris was saying that's a great place to start. That absolutely is a great place to start. I spoke a little bit about the whole idea around what is going on in sort of the IT or the rest of the company, and mirroring or using as much as you can out of those kind of things. But then really, and boy, I sound like I'm just giving everybody else good credit here, but it's true. And Bill, I didn't want to extend the conversation, but you were talking about building, taking an OT person and make them, educate them in cybersecurity. I would say if you took those three things together, you would have a great start. So, pick a standard. There's a lot of overlap. Just pick one. Don't agonize over it. If you find out it's wrong, change. But pick a standard. Find a guy or a gal on the shop floor that is interested in security, and get them more trained up. Get them beyond this attitude that it's all voodoo magic. It's not, right? But look, again, the guys that know processes don't view how or know how the network works. So everything they can know and understanding that, I think, is great. And then again, fit your policy and your program into the overall sort of general risk appetite that your company has. And I think you got a winning combination.
Awesome. Well, unless any of the other panelists want to comment on that question, we'll go to Q&A. Steve, do you want to?
Yeah, I just have one last thing. That we talked about the IT folks and what whether or not they can be trainable, and I think anybody's trainable, right? And so when you look at how do we train them, right? What do they need to understand? It's important to remember that we were not born with this knowledge, right? We all learned it somehow. And so there must be a good way to impart that knowledge. So I think that we can take people from both sides. We are all more comfortable and familiar with the operations folks, but there's a lot of really bright IT folks that would be happy to come over to the process side.
Yeah, I think finding someone who has a attitude of wanting to learn to grow their career in a new direction is a good place to start, right? If you have an eager person who's interested in this and sees it as a growth opportunity, then it's a matter of time, and it's a matter of time.
Right, exactly.
So there's actually one last question before we go to the Q&A. So my mistake, I missed this one actually, and this Chris is directed towards you. So where do you recommend a manufacturer start with respect to leveraging technology to secure manufacturing, their processes, plants, and people? So from a technology perspective,
Boy,
what do you think is a good place to start for manufacturing?
From a technology perspective, we already covered the process, right?
Yeah.
And really understanding your environment. I think it's important to understand your network architecture, what devices are there. Being able to segment those networks so that you can really start to see that traffic. And it's a careful process, right?
Yep.
Being able to install devices in the network that can either listen to what's happening on the network or be a part of that network, so that you can really start to understand how your environment's talking, right? There's as designed and there's as built. And they are hopefully very similar, or if not the same, but not always. And we need to understand how devices are talking to each other.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean, what protocols are they using? Over
I would
what
also
network segments?
I would also add as found, right? It was
Right.
designed one way,
Yeah.
it was built another way, and then stuff happened.
And then somebody at 2 a.m. had to get it working. And yeah.
Right. Or someone came in and
the
added a
example
condition
I
monitoring
had
system.
was, well, when we changed this setting to this, it worked. Well, yeah, that's because you allowed all traffic to go through the firewall, right? And that's a method, but it's not a preferred method, right? And so, that's part of it, right? Is reviewing your firewall rules, reviewing, when you're at that stage, reviewing your network configurations to make sure, and your device configurations to make sure that there's not unused services, unused ports just open for anyone to exploit.
So in terms of starting, what I heard you say was essentially visibility and segmentation. Those are the places,
To
like,
put it simply, yeah.
what do I have on my network? That's
Yeah.
visibility, asset management, etc. And also,
Right.
how flat is it, and how do I want it to be that flat? Right.
Yeah.
Right. Great. All right. So, hey, panelists, great job. We got through all of our pre-planned material, and now it's time for the speed round of Q&A. It's 2:44 Eastern time. We have 14 more minutes because I need to send people on their way with 2 minutes of extra time. So I'm just going to start at the top and go down, and then, hit the buzzer to see who wants to take it. So this question comes from Yasuhiko, who asks, what is the best practice to connect machines and IoT products at the factory to the cloud?
What Chris just said. Know how it works, know what the protocols are, only let the absolute minimum things through, and make sure you watch that connection very carefully.
Yeah.
And make sure that if you're collecting data and that data is not fed back into the control process, there's absolutely no reason for those to be on the same network. Right? And so let's make sure that we're isolating that data. If it's for predictive maintenance or something like that, it doesn't need to be part of your control network.
Yeah, especially if it's a real IoT device, which to me means it's like it's got a sensor and somehow it's sending data to the cloud. Maybe it doesn't need to talk to the rest of the OT process, which is kind of ideal.
Mhm.
I would also suggest looking at how it gets updates. If it gets updates, how it gets patched. If it gets patched, you don't want it to become part of some botnet in the future, and you don't want it to be exposing your network to stuff you don't know it's being exposed to. All right, next question. This question comes from Anil, who asked, is two-factor authentication the most generic solution for cybersecurity? Steve.
Well, if I understand the question correctly, I think, is two-factor authentication a good security control that should be applied? I think the answer is yes. I think we should all know now that it's really important, especially on remote access connections, for example, that you have more than just a single factor if you're going to log into something. So two-factor authentication so far is a pretty good way of minimizing the likelihood of someone getting unauthorized access to your resources.
Yeah, I would agree with that, particularly when it comes to remote access or potentially some kind of privileged access within the network. And then I don't know if it means it's the most generic thing, but okay, let's keep going.
And it used to be kind of a
Chris.
challenge to set up 2FA, and it's not really hard anymore.
Mm.
It's a really basic functionality of most network security devices, and many host-based systems as well.
Great. And one place where we saw it could have been helpful was last year at the Oldsmar attack, where people had access to the water system that shouldn't have had access to it. Multi-factor, two-factor could have potentially reduced that risk. All right. This question comes from Zishan. Zishan asks, how secure is cloud enterprise resource planning provider? So
I would say as secure as you make it. Follow the same rules that we talked about for Yasuhiko's question. But, the point I would make is we're starting to see DCS in the cloud, right? Which I think 5 years ago, people would have said, you're crazy. That'll never happen, right? And so if you can do DCS in the cloud, you can do ERP in the cloud. There's nothing stopping you. And I think, depending on your ERP vendor, you might be forced there anyway, whether you like it or not. So, follow similar guidelines to what we talked about for, connecting machines and IoT products.
okay. Here's another question from Anil. DDoS attacks, how do you make them sense early and quickly? So let me just sort of try and reinterpret that. How do you detect a DDoS attack early and fast?
So most DDoS these days have over the years have kind of moved from the responsibility of sort of us as individual consumers to things that your service provider should probably be taking care of. I mean, that's the place for them to be sensed early and often. And those are the folks that are most capable of black holing and otherwise moving the traffic into places that aren't harmful. So certainly I would have a chat with your ISP and make sure that they're good at that.
Yep. Agreed. Here's another question from Zishan. How secure are third-party integrations?
So if the question there is referring to things like libraries and open source code or kind of shared functionality, I think we know that there's some concern about that. The provenance of those types of code. Having a software bill of materials, so you know what is in your stack and where it comes from and who maintains it is quite important. And as we've seen in the past with Heartbleed and other kind of Apache related vulnerabilities, even if you're not using some of this functionality, the vulnerabilities are actually in the stack that you've got, in the infrastructure you've got, and exposing you maybe even before you're even aware that you've got that stuff. So I think it's a real problem.
So I think that's an important answer with respect to what are the components of a piece of software. But the way I interpreted the question was, what about when you've got two pieces of software and you've integrated them together? So It's a little bit of a different question. Does
Well,
anyone care to take that on?
Well, so I can say one thing about that. I mean, yeah, so if now you're talking about it's more like custom developments, then, you know, it's even more of a concern, because now how do you kind of validate the quality of that and the security of that? What testing goes on to validate that you haven't introduced new vulnerabilities? Yeah, especially if you're integrating systems together. So you're using APIs, for instance, so you've got access, privileged access to systems, perhaps, to allow you to do that. And that if you don't write that code properly, then you're allowing some kind of privileged access to systems that you might not want to do. So yeah, it's a real concern.
Okay, thanks, Steve. And here's the next question from Taz is, what would the best and most relevant IoT/OT cybersecurity certification for aspiring professionals to pursue? So what would you recommend aspiring professionals pursue when it comes to relevant IoT or OT cybersecurity certifications?
Well, Steve will like this. I would say, 62443, right? At least level 1, if you can get that, I think is a fantastic start to really understand the framework, the entire thought process behind the standard, because it really is different than a lot of standards that have come before it, in the fact that it's both accommodates a risk-based approach as well as a network architecture-based approach.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it.
I have to agree. I'm also, I have to admit, I'm 624 certified, so I might not be have a neutral opinion. But to add on, I would say that the SANS also has some pretty good courses as well.
Yeah.
It's different.
Yeah.
It's a different view. So I would certainly review both those things to say what fits with you best. But yeah.
But man, if you had both of those, you're looking pretty good in terms of really a strong grasp of the fundamentals, I would say.
Yeah.
Here comes a question from Sriram. I hope I'm saying your name, Sriram, correctly. What are the biggest cybersecurity attacks you've experienced in manufacturing environments, and what all precautions we need in place? So, what's the biggest threat in manufacturing?
Today, I don't think it's a real argumentative kind of stance to say ransomware, right? I mean, I suspect all of us have lived through those. I've lived through incidents where every PC on the shop floor was locked up. People were highly paid individuals were walking around and backing up controllers by plugging physically into them. And, it took a long time to recover. So again, love to hear another side of it, but that would be my opinion.
I'd agree.
Yeah, I would agree, because again, it's not that you're even targeted. It's just that they get lucky and they still make money.
Yep. Okay, so here comes a question from Venkat. When IoT products are developed, it still seems pretty challenging to provide enough resources to make it as secure as possible. Do you notice that IoT products are not lacking security? If so, what are the aspects that you see when deploying IoT products? I mean, do you notice that he's asking, do you notice that IoT products are lacking in security?
Yeah, I mean, in this context, let's define it, I guess, as IIoT.
Yeah.
I find that IIoT products tend to do a better job, right? Because they know the business that they're going into, they know the environment that they're going into, versus, something that's a sensor in your house. It's all about cost and nobody even knows to care about security. And so I find those are generally better. If I was to add network security onto that, I would segment them as much as possible. That's always how you should do things, right? But I would pay special attention to what resources they're trying to reach out to, whether that's in the cloud, whether that's on-prem, or anything related to that.
Okay, so speed round. Nil asked, how do you make sure that pen tests are robust? And I would just answer that and say, find pen testers who have been in your environment before.
Compliance should never report to operations.
Yeah.
Right? And so your pen testers shouldn't report to operations.
Yep. And everybody, you might see the session rating screen is coming up. We've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to try and get a few more of these questions in. Let's see. This one comes from Joshua. As a manufacturer selling equipment into plants with high security concerns, is there a standard for cybersecurity or testing that we should try to certify our products to? And the answer is
Steve?
Well, yes. I mean, the as we said earlier, the problem is that you're trying to secure something that's insecure by design. So, I mean, that's got to be the starting point. And before you buy something, that's the ideal opportunity to demand that people comply with these things.
I was
Right.
trying to throw you a softball.
Yeah, so the answer is
62443.
62443-2-4.
Covers the people
yes.
that write software and build those, and they should be
Yeah.
able to tell you that they followed the standard in writing them. And again,
Yeah.
reward those people that actually follow the standard and have secure coding.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So folks, thanks so much for the questions. There's so many of them that we weren't able to get through all of them, unfortunately. I want to thank Dwayne, Chris, and Steve for your amazing insights and knowledge. I really appreciate you doing this panel with me. It was fun. I want to thank again the sponsors. So Hitachi Vantara, HiveMQ, Faircom, Fortinet, Eurotech, Oxys, Building Cybersecurity, Zona, MSA, GE Digital, IFM, Intel, Litmus Automation, and NCC Group. Thank you for sponsoring this event. Your support ensures we all have the great content to share here. Thanks to the attendees for their awesome questions and their attention. Really appreciate it. And now it's time to move on to the next session. So I hope you all have a great day and enjoy the rest of the content you're going to get as part of IoT World Manufacturing and Supply Chain.